Hi, it's Michelle. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Michelle. I make videos about books. Please hit the subscribe button. It really helps my channel grow. Today I am doing a collab video with a bunch of other booktubers. I will put their channels down below. Definitely check them out. But we are compiling a list of books that made us cry. Essentially, April showers bring book tears. I will be the first to admit that I am not very emotional. I have said this so many times, but when a book makes me cry, I automatically give it 5 stars. So I do have a favorites list on Goodreads, and I looked at those books and I was like, all of these books made me cry. That's why they're my favorites. But I compiled a list of the ones that, like, to this day, I still remember, like, why they made me cry, what was happening, all those things. So I'm just going to talk to you about those books that made me cry. And the last one is going to be really surprising, I think. So let's get into it. The first one is an oldie but a goodie, and that is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is one I have featured in a couple of videos, one specifically books I wish I could read again for the first time, because I did reread this and it just didn't hit the same way it hit the first time I read it. But I read this in one night, not even like I owned this book at the time. No, I got like an e-copy from the library and I read it at work when I was supposed to be working. And then I came home and I continued to read it on my phone, and like Casman was trying to ask me like, okay, what do you want for dinner? And I was like, I literally cannot talk to you right now. I have to finish this book. So when I got to the end of it that night, I cried because of everything. I think I was just like so overwhelmed that I had like put my whole emotions into this book, and I read it in one night, and it's just like, also the ending is quite sad. So The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo made me cry a lot, and I wish I honestly wish I could go back in time and reread it again for the first time, because rereading it like I knew what was gonna happen, I guess. So I didn't cry the second time, but the very first time I read this, tears. I don't cry. I cried with all these books. The next one is History Is All You Left Me by Adam Silvera. This was the very first Adam Silvera I had ever read, and honestly, being quite honest, the only Adam Silvera that I like. This is the story of a boy named Griffin who his ex-boyfriend just died, but his ex-boyfriend has a new boyfriend. So Griffin and the new boyfriend like get together and like talk about their feelings about this boy that they both loved. And this was just like literally so sad. Once again, I read this at work and it was one of those ones that like I just remember reading this book and being so sad. This was quite a time, and I'm pretty sure I finished it at work and like had to go to the bathroom and have like a little tear fest. So if you're looking for that in your YA queer contemporary, then I absolutely suggest History Is All You Left Me. The next one is another YA. I am not sure if I would ever be able to reread this book because of the emotional damage that this put me through the first time. But that is I'll Give You the Sun by Jandy Nelson. This was Jandy Nelson's most recent book, and by most recent, I think this came out in 2015 and she hasn't written anything since. Like, and I think it's because she can't top this one. Like, this book is so beautiful, and it took me years and years to pick it up. Like, it won all these awards, it was so acclaimed, it was all this stuff, and like when I hear that, it makes me want to read a book less. Like, it scares me. I don't know, don't ask why, I don't know. This was one I read, I think it was the very beginning of 2018. It was like maybe 2019. It was one of the first books that I read that year, and it ended up being my favorite book of the whole entire year. And that is because, once again, of the emotional impact it had on me. I remember finishing this book and just sobbing on the couch. Like, this is following a pair of twins, boy-girl twins, as they try to figure out adolescence, and the timeline of this just really worked for me. I will say these chapters are like 75 pages long, and that was not something that I was prepared for. So if you're looking to have a good cry, be prepared that these chapters are ridiculously long, but the payoff is everything. The next book is so old, but I feel like I couldn't make this video without bringing up this book, because I remember where I was when I was listening to this book, and I'm gonna tell you about it. So that is The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. Listen, back in the day, libraries had this like little player. It wasn't like CDs, it was like a electric thing where you put headphones in. It was like in between CDs and like Overdrive and Libby. It was like this in-between thing. I was in college, it was 2012. I was in college and I was sitting in like the community center eating a burrito, listening to this book, and it's the part, we get to that part where something happens to one of the characters. I had to put my head down at the table and like face the wall and sob. It was like, I don't know, no one came up to me, but I'm sure people were looking at me. I was a mess. Like, this book is so memorable to me. I will never forget where I was when I hit that part in the book, because like I was sobbing uncontrollably in public. Like, it was just like, that's how big of an effect that had. Like, in public I was sobbing. So not emotional. Yeah, I'm gonna go with the last YA that I have, and that is Instructions for Dancing by Nicola Yoon. This is pretty recent. I think this came out in 2021. I read this first as an ARC, and I will say that when I was reading it as an ARC, I was extremely pregnant with Theo. So like, my emotions, my hormones were haywire. But we get to a part in this book and I was once again sobbing uncontrollably on the couch. Like, my husband was looking at me and he was like, "Are you okay? Like, what is wrong with you?" And I was trying to explain to him what was happening in this book. So fast forward, when this book is actually released, I reread it on audiobook, and I remember folding my laundry. I was folding my laundry and the part came up again on the audiobook, and I stopped folding my laundry and I sat on the floor and I cried again. So I don't think it was the pregnancy hormones that made me cry, because I cried again. Like, I knew exactly what was going to happen in this book and I cried. But in this book, we are following our main character whose parents are getting divorced and she no longer believes in love. Like, the very first scene, she is going to donate all her romance books to the public library. Like, she's done with romance. And then she gets this like mysterious thing happens to her where when she sees a couple kiss, she sees their entire relationship play out. And then we meet a love interest named X, and it is so good. It's also devastating. So, whatever. Do with that what you will. The last like romance one before I get to my last book, which may surprise literally everyone, but that is The Charm Offensive by Allison Cochran. This was another book I was listening to on audio, and this book follows this guy named Nick, I think. Nope, Charlie. Nick and Charlie. That's Heartstopper. Okay, we're following Charlie, who is going on this like bachelor type show to find a companion to help his business. Then we were following Dev, who is like his producer and handler, and like all these things are helping him, and it turns into a love story. And at the very end of this book, there's like a reunion show for the show, right? I was gonna say book. No, there's a reunion for the show. I think, and I'm not even kidding, I was folding laundry again and I just start crying. I read this last year and it made my top 3 romance of the year. Like, that's how good it was. And I think I read it in like March or April, so like it survived that whole year. I absolutely love this book. This is Allison Cochran's debut, and it is such a beautiful book, and it has the best mental health representation still that I have read in a book. So if you are looking for romance and you are looking for absolute perfect mental health representation, absolutely recommend The Charm Offensive. So this last book is going to be a little surprising to people, and I was looking at my favorites list on Goodreads, and it's the very bottom one. I think this is the book that made me start my favorites list, and it's really surprising, and it's a very weird choice, but that is It by Stephen King. I don't know. I read this book back in 2017. I read it with my eyeballs. I read it physically back in 2017. It took me 6 weeks to read. This book is like, it's a horror. It's horror. It's about a deadly clown. However, at the end, there is something that not happens to a character, but is like very pivotal to a character and his relationship, and it never makes it wasn't in the first movie back in the 90s, and it wasn't in the movie that came out in 2018. They always skip this part in the 2 movies that I have seen adapted of it, and I don't want to ruin it for you, but if you have read this book, you might know it involves a bike. I don't know if it was because I was done this book, it was like such a relief to be done this book, or because like these characters have been through so much and like not all of them had a happy ending. I don't know, but this horror book made me cry. I cried at the end because of this one scene that involves a bike. And I wish that one of the adaptations had included it, because that was the reason that it made me cry. So, I don't know. If you're into horror and you haven't read it yet, I do recommend it. It's one of my favorite horrors of all time, even though it took me over a month to read, but in the end, it did make me cry. So that is some of the books that made me cry. What are some books that have made you cry that are really surprising? Like, I feel like It is very, like, that is the outlier of my list. But yeah, thanks for watching my video. See you in my next one. Bye.
Losing time, I'm fading fast.